The Winkle Brig is a 16-feet trailer sailer with ample accommodation, built-in cooker and toilet. She has a double berth and 2 quarter berths. This video is to assist new owners to rig and launch the boat with a minimum of effort. Having arrived at the slipway and ready to launch the boat, first of all, undo the tie-down straps and unlash the mast and sails. The next step is to remove the gaff, boom and mainsail from the top of the cabin. This makes raising the mast a lot easier. Check that the rigging is not snarled up on any part of the cabin. Untie the mast and roller reefing. Move the unit backwards until the hole at the foot of the mast lines up with the hole in the tabernacle. Slide the steel bolt through the tabernacle and secure with the 2 brass domed headed nuts. Do not over tighten. If you are rigging the mast single-handed, it will be necessary to lead the forestay lacing through a shackle at the end of the bowsprit. It is always best to leave the shrouds attached to the chain plates so that only the forestay needs to be adjusted every time the mast is raised or lowered. mast can be raised at this stage, taking care not to damage the roller reefing gear. The forestay lanyard can be tied, or a rope can be attached to this lanyard and led back to the cockpit, which means you can tighten the forestay from a position in the cockpit. If the shrouds are left attached, the only lanyard to adjust is on the forestay. The next sequence shows the correct way to adjust the tension on the forestay. After 3 or 4 turns of the lanyard, pull the forestay until you achieve the required tension. If you put more than 4 turns on the lanyard, the friction will prevent you from doing this. Once you have achieved the required tension, simply wind the rest of the lanyard through. You will see from this shot the level of tension required. When you near the end of the lacing, it is then wound around the main body and normally finished with 2 half hitches. The tail end of the lacing can then be tucked inside the lay, and the mast is now completely rigged. We now move on to securing the roller reefing drum. I prefer to use a reef knot with 2 half hitches in each of the loose ends. It is important that this does not undo when you are sailing. Next, run out the roller reefing line and thread it through the fair lead on the bowsprit. And attach it to the drum. Tie off the jib sheets with a figure of 8 knot to prevent them pulling through the fair lead on the cabin top. By releasing the reefing line and pulling on the jib sheets, the jib will then unfurl. The reefing line will then furl itself onto the drum. By doing the operation in reverse, releasing the jib sheets and pulling on the furling line, the jib rolls up. It is also possible to stop this operation at any point so the jib is partially unfurled. One should always check this operation before launching, as it is easier to rectify on the trailer, but not on the water. We are now ready to begin to attach the mainsail. First of all, attach the boom jaw parrel. This is a line which prevents the boom becoming unattached from the mast. Next, untie the topping lift from the shrouds. The topping lift is a continuous line which runs each side of the boom and gaff. Always look up when rigging a halyard or topping lift to see there are no twists near the top of the mast. Tie off the tail of the halyard to prevent it going up the mast. And then take the topping lift around the end of the boom and gaff and underneath the sail. Lead the tail of the topping lift through the blocks at the front of the cabin and back to the jamming cleat. Finishing off with a figure of 8 knot. The topping lift itself locates on a small stainless steel hook near the end of the boom. The gaff saddle can now be attached. Simply thread the line around the mast and through the eye in the saddle and secure it with a stopping knot. This shot shows the parrel beads, which are the small wooden beads attached to the gaff saddle. We can now prepare to attach the peak and throat halyard. When I am de-rigging the boat, I always wrap the halyards and the topping lift around the shrouds, which prevents them becoming entangled with each other. The tail of the halyard will be attached to the end of the block. The peak halyard is the one which attaches to the highest point on the mast. It is essential that there are no twists in these halyards, as they will prevent the sail from lowering. The halyards simply shackle to eye bolts on the gaff in a high-peaked rig. On a traditionally rigged boat, the throat halyard attaches to the sail lacing. It is easy to see and sort out any twists in the halyards at this stage. After the halyards are attached to the eye bolts, feed the tail end on the lead blocks on the front of the cabin and back to the jamming cleats. By pulling on the throat halyard, the mainsail will begin to rise near the mast. Tie off this halyard temporarily onto the gaff jaws. We are now ready to lace the mainsail to the mast. The lacing goes through one side of the mainsail and across the front of the sail and around the mast. It is not attached in a spiral, but in a zigzag. If a spiral lacing is used, it will tend to jam on the mast. The main sheet has a 4-to-1 reduction and attaches to the 2 eye bolts at the rear of the boat and to an eye bolt near the end of the boom. There is a swivel in a double block to facilitate free movement. The next operation is raising and lowering the mainsail to see if everything runs freely. It will help if the boat is head to wind doing this, but it is not absolutely essential. The topping lift need not be adjusted at this stage. And as you can see, the mainsail should lower freely under its own weight, and the gaff should gather up in the double topping lift. The double topping lift will prove to be a very valuable asset. The reefing lines should be checked during this operation to see that there are no twists or tangles in them. It will be found to be of value if you practice reefing the mainsail while the boat is still on the trailer. First of all, lower the peak and throat halyard, then tie the lanyard in the reefing eye in the luff of the sail. Next, pull on the appropriate reefing line and the sail is then reefed. It is not always necessary to tie in the reefing points in the sail. It is often considered good practice when beginning a voyage and you are uncertain of the wind strength to put in 1 or 2 reefs in the mainsail before casting off, as it is far easier to undo a reef than to put one in when one is underway. To put a second reef, just repeat the operation. The reefing line for the second reef will be found on the opposite side of the boom. This operation can be achieved without leaving the cockpit. However, it is always advisable to wear a harness. There is a harness attachment point built into the cockpit of the Winkle Brig. Now that the Winkle Brig has been fully rigged and checked on dry land, we can begin to launch. Before launching, check that the centerboards move freely and they are tied in the up position before launching. You can also see that it is not always necessary to submerge the trailer completely. The roller coaster trailer is designed to launch and recover the boat single-handed. On some slipways, it may be necessary to remove the rudder. Recovering the Winkle Brig is the reverse operation of launching. The trailer is completely self-aligning and the winch has high and low gear. You will notice from this shot that the wheel hubs have not been totally submerged to prevent water attacking the bearings. However, one should always hose down the wheels and trailer with fresh water after use to help prevent corrosion. This operation of launching and recovery can usually be completed without the need to go in the water. When sailing the Winkle Brig, one should leave both keels in the down position. As you will see, all the controls lead back to the cockpit, and single-handed sailing is a delight. And now here we are on our maiden voyage.